Hey guys, today's a great day for a misty forest, so we're going to paint this one today. The supplies are listed below, so let's get started. So as always, we're going to start out with wetting the paper. My papers are just 100% cotton watercolor paper, which is pretty dry. So I usually have to do at least 2 layers of water for this, and also I live in a pretty dry environment. So this is a very important part of the process. So make sure your paper is wet just like this without any puddles. So I have a pretty diluted mix of Payne's gray over here. I'm going to use my round 6 Uku brush to put in a light layer of the Payne's gray for the sky. I don't want the sky dark because my trees are going to be dark, so I want to keep the sky light for a nice contrast so that the trees will stand out. I like to put in swooping strokes for my sky for some movement instead of back and forth, left and right. And then also keep the darker or the upper part of the sky darker than as you work down towards the foreground, keep it lighter. I'm wetting the bottom part of my paper again because it seems to be dry already. You may not need to do this. Like I said, I live pretty much in the desert, so my paper dries pretty quickly. And make sure you keep your edges clean so you don't have any runbacks. So we're going to move on to the next step. I'm mixing up a thick dark green right now. For my first layer of trees, I'm using a combination of undersea green and Payne's gray. And you'll also see later on that I'm going to put in a little bit of burnt sienna too for some pops of warm brownish orange, and just to kind of warm it up and keep it interesting. But I'm going in with that dark undersea green and Payne's gray mix first. My paper right now is still moist to wet, and I am putting in the mixture starting at the bottom and then working my way up with a sort of like a flick of my brush, just kind of gently doing that. And you can see that the colors are kind of bleeding up and fanning out, and it creates a really nice soft transition into the sky. And this can only happen if your paper is still wet. If your paper is not wet, make sure you wet it, let it soak in a little bit, and then do this step. I'm dropping in just straight up undersea green right now. That's why it's a little more yellow without the Payne's gray, and then putting in a little bit of the burnt sienna as well for some interesting pops of colors. I needed to wet that part of my paper again. It's dry. I need it to be wet to move on to the next step, to paint the next layer of trees in the distance. Maybe yours is still wet, and so you don't have to do this step. So just kind of keep an eye out on your paper. So I've switched over to a smaller brush for smaller trees and just kind of less water, and putting in just suggestions of tree lines in the distance. You want to make sure that these trees are smaller than your foreground trees that you just painted because they are in the distance. So keep it smaller, just suggestions of them. It doesn't have to be any detailed trees or anything. So as I put in the background trees, I am leaving gaps in between each of the tree lines or layers of tree lines to suggest mist, and that is communicated through leaving white space on the paper. I don't want to fill it all the way up. And I'm using a soft brush right now just to kind of clean up the edges and soften up the edges as well. Because mist is soft, it's not a harsh line. So that's what I'm trying to create here, is kind of soft lines of mist moving through the forest. And this is mostly done with my soft round brush. Not a lot of water, because you don't want to drop more water into the paper. And relatively clean as well, but still moist so that you can soften up the edges. So here I am using the tip of my brush. This brush has a very fine tip. I love that. Just pulling up some of the colors in the trees to make it look more like trees, pointy trees growing up. And this would just really add to the overall suggestion of trees in the background. And as I'm doing this, I might drop in a little bit more color sort of at the base of the trees. So I'm going to move on to the foreground trees, and I noticed that my paper is dry again. So I am re-wetting it just a little bit, kind of at the bottom, so that I can drop in another layer of dark trees again, just like the first step. I'm using my undersea green with my Payne's gray, dropping in the colors starting at the bottom and kind of flicking it up to shape the trees. You don't want to cover up the first layer of trees that you put down, so make sure that this current layer you're working on is shorter so that the first layer is still kind of poking through at the top. I'm also adding a little bit more of the burnt sienna as well for visual interest. I think it looks really pretty and kind of warms up the whole piece so that it's not all green. I'm going to let that dry, and I'm putting in a little bit more color to my background trees now that they're a little bit more dry, so that, if they're not completely wet, if it's a bit more dry, it's able to kind of retain that color and intensity a little bit more. But if it's very wet, it's just going to wash out. So I think I've waited enough to where I can inject a little bit more color sort of at the bottom part of the background trees. And then again, as I'm dropping it in, I'm flicking it up just a little bit to kind of shape it, make it kind of pointy. And notice I'm using my smaller round brush too for precision and making the trees pointy. Right now I'm using mostly a moist, clean brush to pick up a lot of the colors sort of at the top portion of the tree line of my foreground trees, just to kind of break up this huge area of dark colors, letting more air into this forest, letting more light in, letting more of the mist and fog in. So I can do that by lifting some of the colors up with a clean, moist brush. And you can only do this if your paper is still wet or moist. If it's dry, you cannot do the lifting method. And make sure that your brush is just moist, not wet, and also clean when you do lifting. And I also did some lifting with the help of a wet, clean, wet ball of paper towel. So that's what I'm doing right now, just going in and kind of seeing where I want this mist to be and where I want it to go. So like I said, it's kind of moving through the forest, kind of at the canopy at the top of the forest. So this is more of, your own creative session right here. Where do you want the mist? And just kind of lift it up with the lifting method. Again, make sure your paper is still moist for this technique. So right here, I am injecting a little bit more semi-details to my trees at the foreground. I'm using the tip of my smaller round brush to drop in sort of marks to suggest branches sticking sideways and branches sticking all the way up, sort of the tip-top part of the trees. And the lifting technique left me some white areas on the paper to help these marks to kind of stand out. And when you're going through and putting in trees, I don't recommend painting in a full tree top to bottom. I suggest just kind of skipping around, painting a suggestion of a tree here and there, maybe just the right side of it, or just the tip of it, or just a middle part of it. So skip around, don't paint one whole tree at any spot. So since my paper is still moist, I'm going in and lifting a little bit more, kind of within the foreground grouping of trees, because I want to bring some of that mist into that layer, this layer of trees too. So that's how I'm doing it, is kind of using my clean, wet ball of paper towel to do that. Alright, we're going to let this layer dry 100% before we move on to the next step. I have a thick dark layer of my undersea green and Payne's gray using my small round brush, but this is my round 6. It has a great point. I'm going in and painting the trees. Again, kind of skipping around. Don't paint a full tree from top to bottom. Find a spot or an area on your painting that looks like it could be a tree, and just place a tree there. That's fine. It doesn't have to be symmetrical, or make sure you vary the height of each of the trees. And of course, do not paint in a full tree from top to bottom. And remember that your brush strokes kind of towards the bottom of a tree should be bigger than the top part of the tree as well. Avoid painting over the white areas of the paper where you've placed your mist. You don't want to put your tree over that. We want to preserve that. So it looks like I'm switching over to my foliage brush, my handy flat foliage brush, just to help me vary up the strokes a little bit more. I found it a little bit easier to use my foliage brush than a round brush to keep my strokes different and help me make marks that are not all the same. It really takes the thinking out of painting a tree, in my opinion, when I use my foliage brush. And here I am using a small liner brush. I'm using this to paint in suggestions of tree trunks, kind of peeking through the mist and in between the branches. You don't want to overdo this, just, here and there, suggestions of the tree trunks, just to kind of bring the top and the bottom part of your trees together. And remember to preserve some of the white spaces that you've blotted out with your paper towel so that we can still have mist or suggestion of mists poking through. You can also use some of the burnt sienna to paint in some tree trunks. Even if it doesn't feel or look realistic to do so, I think it just really, again, adds that pop of color to the whole painting. Alright, I think I'm gonna step away and I'm done, so let's peel the tape, which is my favorite part. I'm really happy with how this turned out. I love how moody it is, and I haven't painted a misty forest in so long. So I hope you paint it with me. Let me know if you have any questions. Let me know if you gave it a try. And yeah, happy painting everyone. Thanks for watching. Bye.